On October 6th, a suspicious countdown was posted on the Garo Project Twitter or X account, leading up to an announcement on October 10th that, for the first time in 4 years, a new Garo project was going to be released. Shortly after was the release of an announcement video. This wasn't just any new series, this is Garo, the one who inherits steel. It's a sequel series to Garo, the one who shines in the darkness, with Wataru Kuriyama reprising his role as Garo. And of course, I'm forever behind in the Garo series. For the last number of years, I've watched the Garo series in October. It's become one of my favorite Halloween traditions. And I skip Garo, the one who shines in the darkness, choosing to ignore the Ryuga-verse as it's become known in the fandom. And since it was the 10-year anniversary, I figured there's no better time to jump into the story of Yuga-dogi. In some ways, breaking away from the Saejima continuity was a big deal for me. There are elements of Garo that I haven't always loved, and seeing a chance to break away from the baggage of that universe was appealing. But I also felt like I was jumping into a whole new show. I wasn't entirely wrong about that. Garo, the one who shines in the darkness, in many ways feels like the Garo I already know. On the other hand, it felt fearless in making its own path. Yuga-dogi is very different from Kuga or Raiga. He's a more charismatic and hot-headed character. He's my favorite part of this departure. Gone is Koga's overly stern and cold demeanor, and I can't relate him to Raiga's careless airheadedness. Yuga found himself with orders to go to Vol City, a city that is hidden away but has free healthcare. Truly an oasis of modern times. Of course, nothing is as good as it seems. The city is overwhelmed with demonic horrors, and Yuga is there to cut them down. Yuga doesn't have the trained honorable knight background of the Saejima family. He's flawed and barely knows the rules of the Makai Knights. In this world, the armor's lost its shine in order to seal a significant threat. This makes for an entertaining character that you can re-explore the world with. The knighthood was prominent in the previous Garo series. Here, it feels like a forgotten order that barely exists. But it's also nice to have a clear departure from the Saejima family. There's a scene early on where Yuga gives away Zaruba. He's not out of the story altogether, but you do get the feeling that it's sending a message. This Garo is not holding on to the traditions of the series thus far, losing a lot of the fantasy overtones and instead opting for more of a samurai cowboy aesthetic. This goes along with Vol City becoming a character all to itself. You see happy people, prosperous businesses, and governments. Weird angel statues that randomly sing songs. You know, what every suitable metropolis needs. It also has an army that brings the feeling of a dystopian hellscape if you're on the wrong side. This was one of my favorite things about the introduction of this series. Yuga is a rogue knight going up against a military police force, seemingly alone. That is, until he comes upon his 4 new companions, led by the Makai priest Burai, an older man filling the role of an adoptive father figure. Rian, a Makai priestess trained under Burai, who can shapeshift among other talents, and 2 knights, Guy the Skybow Knight and Zen the Flamesword Knight, who has been judging Yuga from the shadows. This team really makes up the heart of the show. The Garo series has always had teams and side characters, but here it's more of an adoptive family than ever before. Yuga is previously trained under Burai, but they have a complicated path. While adamant about not assisting him initially, Yuga learns to trust Burai. He also has almost a bratty sibling relationship with the 2 knights. The Flame Knight is an annoying little brother type who's also a womanizer, who's just excited to have someone new in the crew. He is excited to treat Yuga as a brother and wants to help him, while Guy is your typical studious prick, who is much more similar to Kuga, caring more about the Makai Knights' now mostly lost honors and traditions. He and Yuga often bump heads, harboring disdain for Yuga and Zen's lack of class. Most of the best episodes in this series are centered around the lesson that the 3 knights understanding their strength as a team will overcome their individual weaknesses. The episodes are the biggest departure of everything I've learned about the Garo series. Almost completely gone is the horror anthology of the early episodes. Typically, in Garo, you have a series of unique horrors that corrupt people's souls and turn them into monsters for the knights to slay. It's not entirely absent, but it does take a noticeable backseat. Every episode works on the character development in some way. There may be a horror doing something special that gets highlighted. However, it's always pursuing furthering the characters' relationships. This would be a good thing, and it's something that I have asked for more from the Garo series. Unfortunately, the development becomes a little bland. You know these characters, they're all archetypes. For being a tokusatsu show for adults, you never get any kind of complex relationship dynamics. When the character moments are good, they're pretty good, but they're never anything groundbreaking. It never rises above the feeling of a kid's show, giving you so many moments where you can tell they want you to feel something, but it's all unearned. That's not to say they're unenjoyable to watch, they're not. Seeing it get so close to hitting more profound character moments is frustrating. You're never surprised at how the relationships end. At its best, it's an endearing family learning to lean on one another. At its worst, they're annoying in the squabbles you know will be worked out. That said, it does a great job of recreating a Garo universe. It never goes out of its way to explain some things with giant exposition dumps. And you're left to assume that many of the same rules of the show are based on the Saejima universe, choosing not to focus on the horrors that you've seen in previous stories. There's a new horror in this universe: magical horrors. Magical horrors, or Mado horrors, are created from seeds, little needles that get stabbed into someone. It acts like a parasite to infect people. Unlike traditional horrors in Garo, these horrors cannot be detected easily. They are not visible from the night's magical flames, and retain a certain amount of self-control, making them indistinguishable to the Makai Knights, often working with them unknowingly. This is really fun because for the first time in any piece of Garo media, you have more charismatic bad guys. They are fun to follow, and you can get a greater sense of what they want. It's more of an organization and less of a mindless killing demon. It gives you something to bite into. This is really needed with the lack of anthology-style early episodes. In the first episode, you're introduced to a soldier named Ino. The way she's set up, she would be a main character to help the group. However, you may get the saddest story in the show of a woman losing her sense of righteousness and her hope for humanity, slowly turning into a new horror. For the first time, the horrors and the knights are entirely computer generated. If you know me, you'd think I'd be bothered by this. Honestly, they look great. There are moments when I get a little pushed out of a scene, but for the most part, they're well done, well composited, and animated beautifully. Overall, this series has significantly less monsters than the rest of the franchise. This allowed them to give more detail and better model animations, since you follow the same good and evil characters through most of the show. They could spend the budget in fewer places. Typically, I hate seeing a computer-generated anything interact with live people. And indeed, there are some uncanny moments. But for the most part, for this show being 10 years old, a lot of the VFX shots really hold up. The action and fights just have really fluid movement. There is overall less transformed fighting per episode, but that's for the best and lends itself to the story's narrative. These are different from the trained knights we are used to. They can barely control their armored forms and struggle. This series doesn't use the 99.9 second time limit, but they're visibly exhausted whenever their armor leaves. Fight scenes have a ton of wire work, and these are some of my favorite sequences across the Garo franchise. Two scenes that stand out the most for me, for whatever reason, both involve moving vehicles. One is a scene early on against an enemy that just comes off to me as a Mr. Smith from the Matrix kind of thing. He just dominates the three knights. It involves a moving rail train, and they bounce in and out of it, both transformed and untransformed. Live character action mixed up with computer animation. Again, some things don't sell me entirely, but it's all saved by how smoothly the action is framed. It's genuinely a remarkable fight. The other is towards the end of the series. There is a long fight scene that involves the knights driving and jumping from cars, with the most needless stunt work that is truly impressive. The amount of timing and choreography needed to pull this off puts the action at the top of Garo for me so far. As a whole, this story is okay. It's not my favorite, and there are some moments when I had no anticipation of being surprised. It got boring, and for me, that's the greatest sin. It puts too much weight on its characters almost unfairly. The 24 episodes of Garo, the One Who Shines in the Darkness, is just too long of a runtime for such a thin story. If I think back on it all, I like the story beats. It works, but I can't help but think that if they had sprinkled some of the anthology episodes, it would have led to better pacing. The story can be summed up rather easily. Yuga is trying to restore the shine of the Garo armor, while figuring out how to navigate the corruption behind the scenes in Vol City. There are a few story beats that hold a few big reveals, but nothing is ever really sold with conviction. The crux of this story really truly hinges on the relationship and family dynamics of these characters. By the time it wrapped, I did love these characters. They have good arcs and are different at the end of the show compared to how they started, but their destinations are never astounding. I do want to see more of them, and I plan to watch the sequel season. It'll also be challenging to not watch the new season when it comes out in January. For me, October and Garo just go together. I love this series and its love for the darkness. And honestly, from here, I don't know what I'll be watching next October. So let me know, where do you suggest I go from here? Be it Zero Black Blood or the Goldstorm movie and TV show? Or do I jump all the way forward to Versus Road? Either way, you can bet I'll be watching something Garo this time next year. I'm High C, and I hope you keep watching.